I need to come to something which is a very uncomfortable issue indeed, which has put pressure not only on Germany. Well, you try to listen away, to close your ears, because you know you hand away. We call this fascism ever since its upcoming in the 20s of the last century in Italy. It catapulted the world in its worst disasters. Brecht, at the end of his huge theatrical piece, the stoppable uprising of the womb of Arturo Ui. Well, the womb is still fertile from which this came to the world. Unfortunately, we've got to Yücel Demirer, a politologist from Turkey, is doing just that. We are very happy that he accepted our invitation. Unfortunately, he could not get a visa, so you will witness him only through the video link. Let me tell you a few words about who he is. After various degrees at the universities in Ankara and Istanbul for political studies and sociology, he got the PhD at the Ohio State University. His interests cover phenomena that are lumped together in the terminology of politics and culture, and also the position of religion in modern times. He's interested in that. On the 2nd of January, in our Zeitung, the Junge Welt, there were 3 lead articles from his pen. He publishes them weekly in the weekly newspaper Evremsel. He sheds light on the militaristic movement, 56 active armed conflicts that are simmering around the world. My favorite statement from these 2 pages of our newspaper is the stress on the brotherhood among peoples in view of the coldness that is conveyed by the rhetorics of war. Yücel Demirer, a cordial welcome with his speech. Your solution of the problem of war and fascism.
It's a great honor and pleasure for me to address you as part of this valuable panel. I must emphasize that I am happy to take part in a meeting organized in the name of Rosa Luxemburg, who was against war all her life, whose anti-war stance determined her political affiliations, who always maintained her revolutionary stance, and who lost her life in the struggle. I am grateful to the comrades who have organized this meeting and invited me to speak. Despite all the efforts of the organizers, it was not possible to obtain a visa in time, and I am unable to join you in person. Before I begin my speech, I'd like to express my deep concern about the genocidal violence against the Palestinian people. I condemn, in the strongest possible terms, the ongoing Israeli aggression in the Gaza Strip, which has killed and injured thousands of innocent Palestinians. The first sentences of this lecture were written in the morning of 8 December 2024. After their rapid advance, the opposition groups took Damascus that morning, and we learned that Bashar Assad had already left Syria. As is well known, the fall of the Syrian regime, which we witnessed at the beginning of last month, is the result of cooperation between the Western imperialism and Israel. The historically significant developments we have seen in Syria in the last month are certainly not the first and not new. In the last 20 years, The USA and others have paved the way for wars against Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Syria, and Somalia. It's interesting to note that these military interventions coincided with a period when Western imperialism was supposedly in decline and falling behind. Before going into the details of how Western imperialism, faced with significant challenges, is turning internationally to fascism and war as a solution, I need to clarify and differentiate my understanding of decline and loss of hegemony briefly. I must quickly say that I do not believe that there is a decline and fall of Western imperialism, as some thinkers claim. Although I agree that there are situations where the hegemony of the imperialist centers is shaken compared to different parts of the political history, it doesn't seem appropriate to me to define this as a decline and fall. However, this is not against the idea that Western imperialism is not relying internationally on fascism and war as its solutions in the present period. As we can see from the developments in Ukraine and Syria and Donald Trump's aggressive statements threatening to invade Mexico and Panama even before taking office, imperialisms continue to look for solutions to their problems in war and fascism. Now that I have closed the parenthesis, I would like to turn to the rise of the politics of war in the present day. At this point, I need to mention two fundamental trends that have affected and continue to affect the whole world. The first of these, if we look at the big picture, is the fact that since the collapse of the socialist bloc, wars and regional conflicts between states and opposition forces have increased all over the world. Since the 1990s, the state of relative equilibrium has been broken and wars of different dimensions have increased. The tensions between the imperialist countries have increased, and in many places, these tensions have reached the level of war. At the same time, the share of arms purchases in the national budgets has increased significantly. The second aspect I would like to highlight is the differentiation that has taken place in bourgeois democracies, especially in recent years. In almost all parts of the world, moderate center-right parties have been replaced by authoritarian and fascist parties. In countries with different historical development dynamics and political cultures, almost similar authoritarian leaders have emerged. Under the rule of these leaders, the familiar framework of bourgeois democracy has been shaken and the political struggle as a whole has been radicalized. If we consider these two data together, the situation that emerges goes beyond the usual results that they produce separately. It can be seen that wars and regional conflicts with imperialist motives are used by authoritarian governments to legitimize their anti-democratic practices. Imperialist states or regional powers that want to share in the imperialist ascendancy use these conflicts to suppress and transform the political environment in their own societies. In my country, for example, the Erdogan regime has used the developments in Syria since December 2024 to change the dynamics that shape Turkish politics and turn the mechanisms of political consent production upside down. It is using the politics of memory very skillfully to gain support at home. Although the first item on the agenda of the working class in Turkey is poverty, the Erdogan regime is using the developments in Syria to create the feeling that the process is developing under its control and in the direction it wants. From a bird's eye view, the developments of imperialism and the resulting transformations confirm the relationship between capitalist exploitation and war established by Marxist thought. The Marxist framework succeeds in revealing the destructive consequences of concern for the accumulation and preservation of capital. Of course, we cannot be satisfied with this historical confirmation, and the current situation calls for new analysis and approaches. The need to understand the current stage of regional and intrastate conflicts and the great power rivalry from a Marxist perspective is still before us. Among many other burning questions waiting to be answered, today I would like to discuss the question of how imperialist wars are legitimized by the bourgeois regimes. The reason for my preference is my belief that the production of thought in this context will broaden the scope of the communist anti-war struggle. In other words, I believe that dealing with the legitimizing practices of the imperialist states will help us understand why, after all these experiences, sometimes significant sections of the working class join a war under patriotic slogans, and how we can fight against nationalist projects directly linked to the contemporary imperialism before wars break out. In my opinion, the scope of discussion of imperialism and anti-imperialist struggle among communists is mostly limited to macro-politics and general comments, and the aspect of daily life and struggle against war policies are not given due importance. For this reason, today, I would like to discuss the mainstream historical understanding of the development of imperialism in order to discuss the possibilities of expanding and spreading the anti-war struggle. Imperialism has become the engine and integral part of capitalist growth. Since the 15th century, imperialism has been characterized by territorial expansion. For this reason, there is a widespread misconception that imperialism ends when conquest stops. However, it is obvious that although the actual dynamics and practices of imperialism have changed, its basic priorities and objectives have remained constant. For example, although mainstream history textbooks refer to the period from 1870 to 1914 as the age of imperialism, the life of imperialism did not end with the First World War. Looking at history from the point of view of the oppressed, it's important to remember that the imperialist rivalry of the European countries in the last years of the 19th century was a beginning rather than an end. The change in the nature of imperialist exploitation does not mean its disappearance, but a change in its form and degree. For this reason, it should be kept in mind that the term age of imperialism is not only inaccurate, but also intended to cover up the contemporary facade and reality of imperialism. One of the negative consequences of the preference for concentrating on the distant history of imperialism and the claim that imperialism has disappeared is that it overlooks how the experience of imperialist exploitation inspired the authoritarian and oppressive regimes that emerge in later history. The traces of imperialism were and are visible in almost all political experiences infected by imperialist plunder and colonial mentality in different historical moments all over the world. These examples show that the spirit of exploitation directed outwards, when it finds favorable conditions, can give reason and energy to internal exploitation. Another distortion in the conceptualization of imperialism comes from the overemphasis on national interests and national political subjects in the definition of imperialism. This obscures the fact that imperialist plunder, although carried out under national flags, is carried out to serve the needs of a ruling class. With this in mind, we must guard against the possibility of the reality of class exploitation being obscured in the shadow of nationalist posturing. Although the main reasons for imperialist expansion have been European industrialization and economic growth and the need for raw materials and markets, non-economic factors have often been exaggerated. The aspect of national glory and prestige and the role of spreading Christianity have been overemphasized by bourgeois historians. What I want to emphasize through the points I have made about the treatment of imperialism in the bourgeois thesis is the need for communists to extend their anti-war consciousness-raising activities to the pre-war period and to the everyday life of the working class. The fact that imperial policies are so easily accepted by large sections of the people forces us to reflect on the reasons for this. I believe that the masses with a consciousness formed by this kind of arguments are more easily convinced of the war formulation. Therefore, the scale of anti-war struggle should be broadened, and we need to develop an anti-war discourse in action that touches people's lives. I believe that more chaotic days ahead, on the threshold of the days that I think will bring pain and misery to the working people, I think that the preparation of us communists against these current imperialist rivalries and conflicts can be ensured primarily by clarity of political position. The clear concepts that communist political parties will produce on this issue are of great importance, especially so that different categories of imperialism, based on unfounded concerns, do not have a slowing down and confusing effect in the current struggle. What I want to say here is that I am concerned that the emphasis on the power struggle between countries makes the conflict between capitals invisible and overshadows exploitation. Given the way in which the capitalist historiography and thesis has slowed down and even prevented anti-imperialist mobilization, what needs to be done is to focus on the contemporary dynamics of the mechanism of exploitation in the imperial order that transcends the nation-state. It must be emphasized that at a time when the main issue is the expansion of production on a world scale, in accordance with imperialist interests, the conflicting actors are not nations but fractions of capital, and the foundations of anti-imperialist politics must be built on such a conceptualization. For this reason, it's crucial for those who oppose the war to make a correct analysis of conflict and the war, as well as to reveal the priorities of those in power who decide to go to war. The analysis to be made should make a healthy breakdown of those who will suffer from the war in the short and long term, and decipher those who will benefit from the war and those who will be harmed by it. Efforts, including international working class solidarity and the exchange of information, must be made against the mechanisms of perception management and the distortion of consciousness that serve to present the interests of the capitalist ruling elite as the interests of the masses. At the beginning of the dossier, How to Latin America Can Delink from Imperialism, published by Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, there is a list of capitalist distortions taken from Eduardo Galeano's marvelous book, Upside Down, a primer for the looking glass world. Under the introductory sentence, quote, "Today there are certain things one can't say in the face of public opinion," end quote, the following distortions are listed. Capitalism wears the stage name market economy. Imperialism is called globalization. The victim of imperialism are called developing countries, as much as a dwarf might be called child. The list successfully demonstrates the importance of ideological struggle and the power of language on which the dynamics of anti-war struggle are based. The way to get rid of imperialist wars and the carnage and misery of wars is through the struggle to get rid of the capitalist system. And the way to this struggle is to get rid of the imperialist obfuscations and distortions. As I come to the end of my speech now, I have no choice but to hope that my speech, which I had to deliver without seeing your faces and feeling your human warmth beside me, was in line with other speeches. I greet everyone listening to me with comradely solidarity and my warmest feelings.